everyone, Xanaro Gaming coming at y'all with another video. And in today's video, I just wanted to get some One Piece coverage. I've been doing a lot of coverage for Union Arena, and I haven't done a lot for One Piece lately. So I'm just trying to bring you guys some of the event data that is off of Eggman Events site. All this stuff is put together by his team. He provides all this data to the community, and his site is so awesome and cool to be able to provide all this data for everybody to go over. But I just wanted to go over these tournaments as well, give you guys kind of a rundown of all the top performing decks provided by the listings here, and then maybe just give you some of my thoughts too on how I feel like the One Piece metagame is shaping out to be. On the site here, I'm just going to cover these last 4 events just from, really the past weekend, and cover those events so that way they're probably the most relevant representation of the, current state of the One Piece meta. I do think that at the moment the meta is in a really healthy spot. As you can tell by the pie charts here, the representation is pretty even throughout with a lot of different decks. I think there are definitely 3 or 4 decks that are the top contenders, that being Shanks, Dofi, Blackbeard, all being very high performing decks. Those 3 definitely being the big 3 of the meta, I would say. Those 3 decks, which, rightly so, they're all really strong decks, and they both do, or all 3 of them do very different things. So it's just really like what playstyle you want to play into. But with that being said, let's get into these. I'm just gonna go over the Carta Magica one first, and you can see here that this is the only one that has the total of the leaders listed here. The other ones, I don't think that they have the information yet, but they do such an amazing job on this site that I'm sure they'll get them up eventually. But in the top 16, for the reference of this video, we'll just go over those. There's 4 Shanks at top, 3 Dofis at top, 2 Teaches at top, 2 Usops, and then 1 of Gecko, Monkey D. Luffy, Rob Lucci, Bello Betty, and Boa Hancock. The Monkey D. Luffy being the one from the OP09, which is really cool to see. So pretty diverse, seeing these top 3 decks get a lot of top. Shanks being the outlier, getting the most. Really interesting to see 2 Usops getting in the tops here, and I want to just go down through here and see like if they were on the verge. And yeah, it's looking like they were, just snuck into the top 16s here, both being 7-2 decks, so just kind of sneaking in, so maybe having some favorable matchups. I don't have a ton of experience with Usopp, but I do know a lot of people were kind of sleeping on Usopp going into the meta once the Gecko Moria was hit, and I know a lot of players were thinking that maybe the deck would be, not as good or dead, but glad to see that some people are playing and believing in the deck for sure. It being able to sneak into, top 16 in such a cool event like this with 512 players is, nothing to scoff at, so it does show that people are willing to play this deck. And I will say it is a really cool and seems like interesting and fun way to play the deck. I know that there are a couple of Rebecca stands out there, but I do think that Usopp is the better deck out of those, and it shows here getting some tops in the tournament. Another noticeable top was the Bello Betty and the Gecko Moria. This Gecko Moria getting 5th place is just kind of out of nowhere. Like, I never would have guessed or saw that Gecko Moria would get a top in a tournament in this format. So it'll be interesting to look at this list. I'll try to do some deck lists. I still have to do the Union Arena deck list video, and I'll probably do both of those tomorrow. But really cool to see Gecko Moria, getting a top 5 finish here, top 6 in this format, and it just being a deck that probably came out of nowhere. He probably has some good matchups, and I would love to go over this deck afterwards. But I'm just trying to give you guys a rundown of how these tournaments went out. Rob Lucci not going anywhere, and then yes, here's the Bello Betty. Bello Betty is decent right now, and I think that she only gets better once the new sets come out and everyone's on the Luffys. I think Bello Betty is really strong into those matchups. So glad to see that Bello is able to do so well in this current format, and really cool to see it bring up a 9th place. Another outlier deck being a Boa in the top 12. We've seen Boa on fringes in these big tournaments, having pretty decent showings here, but we're going to see more of these top 3 in all of these different tournaments. That was the post Magica one, and then now we'll get on to the Sang Song Monterey Regionals. That's hard to say. And they just have the top 8 leaders, so not top 16 here, which is a little unfortunate not to be able to see the top 16, but I know that these guys are working really hard to get all this data, and it is a lot of work. Just from the little bit that I do for Union Arena, trying to get that tournament information down, I'm sure that Eggman, he's such a big channel and person in the community. He has a team helping him out, and it's still a lot to, get all this data and try to transfer it over. But just the top 8 listing of leaders here. 3 teaches, 2 of the OP05 Luffys, which is really cool to see, 1 Shanks, 1 of the ST10 Luffys, and then 1 OP7 Rob Lucci. Very different, interesting mix-up. I do think that this would change if it was top 16. Maybe these snuck in into the top 16, and the follow-ups would probably be, you know, a lot of the decks that we would see. Really interesting to not see a Doflamingo in their top 8, though, since we've seen that deck just do so much and win so many tournaments and be, you know, really, really strong. But just seeing these lists, how they played out and through, Shanks did take the win again, and then Teach, Luffy, Rob Lucci, 2 Teaches, and another Luffy. So maybe that these players just have a little bit different standing in Monterey as opposed to how we are here. Could be some like play into that, but Shanks is just so strong, I think, right now. One thing I think about Shanks is it doesn't take a lot to run the leader. I think you either, you know, break really hard and don't really have great games, or you just get to the late game and you just, you know, play down your 10 and 8 drops and proceed to win the game from that point. I do think that he has a little bit more consistent in pressure and showing than Teach does, which makes it seem like where Teach probably has a little bit harder time actually getting a tournament win, but does perform a lot better, I think, overall, probably percentage-wise throughout a long tournament, being a little bit more consistent of seeing all your stuff, but then also just needing to see the Teaches to end the game. Really cool to see Lucci on here. I know we had a lot of people, a couple hardcore Rob Lucci believers state that the deck was, you know, dead, which is definitely not the case. I didn't think that that was going to happen either, that he'd be dead. I do think that he'd be, you know, still a meta deck, and it's interesting to see that we see these Lucci still managing to get tops right. And then we just see these 2 different Luffy leaders. I think it's just what people prefer to play, which Luffy they prefer. But all the Luffys are really, really good, and I think good pilots can do really well with the multiple Luffy decks we have. And we're just getting more and more Luffys that are going to be crazy in the meta. But going on to the Sao Paulo regionals, fortunate that we are provided by Eggman here with the top 16 leaders, which is really, really cool. And you can see here 5 Teaches taking up the top 16 here, which is really, really cool and awesome to see that, you know, these players here really love to see their Blackbeards, and 5 in the top 16 is a pretty big percentage of, you know, tops in a 16 for the deck. And then 3 of the Shanks not going anywhere. The Dofis showing up at full force at this regionals. 2 Rob Lucci's, once again, Lucci is not dead. Another one of the OP5 Luffys. A Jewelry Bonnie finding a way to sneak in, and then also a Smoker. Very interesting to see. I thought Smoker would be doing a little bit better in these tournaments so far, but that is not the case. I do think that the deck wants to see very particular lines in their plays, and it does get a lot of value, and I do think that it maybe just has a hard time dealing with some of the bodies that are on the board if they get swarmed down by the Dofi, and then maybe just Blackbeard walling them out, and then Shanks blowing up all their stuff. But I do think that Smoker is a very skillful deck, and I think that the longer that this deck is out, the more people will be able to perform better on it. I'm really surprised to only see just the 1 Bonnie, right, from all that, from this one and the one before, not having one. I do think Bonnie's in a really, really good spot, but it is also pretty pilot-oriented, and then seeing perfect cards to answer certain things that your opponent are doing, whereas, like, you're not always just controlling the state of the game with what you do. You're playing very reactive to what your opponent does, and sometimes that leads to not seeing the perfect outs that you need to, you know, punish your opponent. They also have 512 players. Teach did take the win this time, so not Shanks. Blackbeard did get the win. The OP05 Luffy coming up in second. If this deck high rolls, it is just absolutely crazy in what it can do. Really cool to see that Bonnie got third, so not seeing a Bonnie place in the other one and then seeing one here just shows like the skillfulness that Bonnie is to play. I know a lot of people can take Bonnie and do pretty decent with it, but to be a really, really good Bonnie player, it does take a lot of work and effort to, you know, the deck has a lot of leeway in deck building and all the good cards that you can get in green, and then just, you know, taking that into a certain meta, knowing your plays will do a lot for you in a big tournament. And shout outs to Zeta for making that happen, because I love Bonnie. She's the first deck ever built in the game. She's definitely one of my top 3 favorite leaders. I love Bonnie. She's super cool. 4th and 5th are going to be Shanks, followed up by a 7th Shanks, and then a Blackbeard in 6th, a Blackbeard in 8th, Lucci taking up 9th, Blackbeard in 10th, a Lucci taking up 11th, and then we see to get to our first Doflamingo, it's all the way down to 12th and 13th, whereas if we would have just taken, instead of the top 16 like this one has, and it was just the top 8 or 12 from the other one, both of these Doflamingos, one of them would have edged out and not made the top 12, and this other one did. So it looks like, Doflamingo is not as easy of a win as it used to be, but I do think this deck is still really, really strong. And it could be that maybe the amount of players, this one doesn't give us the players that were on the Doflamingo, but maybe the player count is down. So that means maybe some of the really good players that are playing Dofi are going off to other decks. But it is still a really, really strong deck that you can expect to see at big tournaments. 14th is the Smoker, the one top of the Smoker coming in clutch in here, and then Blackbeard, Dofi, and then the Limb bringing up 19th place. So it did not get top 16, but I did want to cover this one because I saw it earlier. Limb almost making it to the top 16 when we've seen Limb either like win tournaments and do really, really well, or just not show up, as we could see in the previous two ones, and this one just not getting edged out. The 7-2, their tiebreaker's not going in their favor. The same thing with the Usopp, the Boa, and the Vinsmoke Reiju, all just kind of their tiebreakers not in their favor, whereas these other decks probably started out hot winning, so their tiebreakers were a little bit better. But that is the Sao Paulo Regionals report, and then the last one I'm going to cover is going to be the No Heroes Mulheim Regionals. And this one is top 16, and it is 4 Shanks. Shanks on top again with the most tops in this one. 3 Blackbeards. And 2 Doflamingo, nothing changing here. These are the 3 top strongest decks in the format at the moment. I do believe so. They just, all 3 do really, really consistent, strong stuff. Very interesting in this one to see 2 Reijus come out of nowhere, where we didn't have any Reijus in these other different big tournaments. So maybe this is a team of players. I would love to know if like they both had the same deck list, or if they are a team that are doing this together and they took a list and they came into a tournament. Maybe, I hope that that's the case. Like, they were working together and they made it happen. I do like Reiju as well. I have her built. She's really, really cool to play. And she's, when Reiju gets going, her value is really, really high. And I think that she has a lot of ways to put pressure on some other decks like the Shanks and the Blackbeard pretty early. If you can, get into that and put a lot of pressure on your opponent, playing your ETGs over and over again. But rounding out the tops, we do have 1 Bonnie, 1 Smoker, 1 Rob Lucci, 1 Zoro, and 1 OP5 Monkey D. Luffy. Really cool to see Zoro get a top here. Definitely one that people, I think, were at the beginning of the format on a lot, and then just realizing maybe, if you're going to run a red deck, you might as well just play Shanks. And a lot of people are coming off the Zoro and the Sanjis and just choosing to pilot Shanks, because Shanks is a little bit easier, a little bit less to think about, which over a big tournament, the less you have to think about your deck, the better you could perform through it over and over and over again. They had 9 rounds of Swiss in this tournament. Top 16 was a best of 3, which is really cool to see. I'll be interested to see what the top card decks are then, because best of 3 really changes stuff. Be really cool to see if the Reijus were in that because of that situation. But really, really cool, nice diverse list. If you take out the top 3 guys, all these other decks finding ways to sneak in and get tops is really cool. But wow, I actually hadn't looked at this one yet, but Rob Lucci actually took the W. So the sole Rob Lucci who got in to the top is the one that ended up beating out all these other decks to take the top first place, which is really, really cool. That is so interesting to see that Rob Lucci is able to answer some of these boards. I will have to look at this deck list when we go to do it. I'll cover some of these deck lists in another video so we can kind of see the breakdown of what they're doing, but I'm just trying to give a rundown of these tournaments and just let everyone else, kind of get my opinion off of it. I know some of these other channels have already covered this a while ago, but I'm just doing my take at it now. And Shanks is coming up in 2nd place, and then we do see here, yes, Reiju did get top 4. I'm imagining if they're putting them here, 3rd place, and then the Doflamingo is 4th place, or if it was just a top cut, then these two just tied for 4th, and they're calling it that way, which is probably the case. But really cool to see the Reiju be able to make it into the top 4. Such a cool, interesting deck, and I'm really excited to see. Shout out to Skips for making this happen, because I do like Reiju players. I like when she gets to do the deck. It's really cool with a good pilot. But one thing to see is in this top 8 so far, no Blackbeards, right? So the Reiju probably was able to match it with the Blackbeard, if I had to assume, and just pushed him out of the game before he was able to get going, which was probably the case the same with the Doflamingo, where he was not able to get the top, and he just barely edged into the top 8, but was not in these top 4 with these other decks. And just rounded out, we see the Bonnie, Shanks, the Blackbeard, Shanks, and then we get to the top 16, which I guess these are in no particular order, but I will put it that way since they put it here. The Zoro sneaking in there at the top, and then we do see the other Reiju down here at the bottom. and one smoker coming in. I do believe in smoker, and I do think that it will start to show out a little bit more the more people get their hands on the deck and can, learn to play it and figure out their lines. But my overall take from all these tournaments is just that Shanks is really, really, really consistent, right? Getting 4, 3, 1, 4. That is a lot of tops in the tournament. And the same thing with the Teach and the Doflamingos. Maybe I'll do a little bit more of a video where I take all this data and maybe do my own thing with the data of the tops and see the percentages that way till we can get a better, explanation of what's going on here. But I would assume that it just really just depends on each of these tournaments and regions all favoring a certain type of deck, which makes the meta kind of curve that way. And that explains a little bit why, in some of these tournaments where you see the Shanks doing a little bit better, it has a little more leeway for these other decks that can punish him to show up. And then the tournaments where there are more Blackbeards play, it is probably a little bit harder for these other decks to sneak into if they don't have as many plays. As you can see here, the pie chart not being as diverse when Blackbeard is the one in the most tops, whereas the Shanks, there are other decks that can play into him a little bit better. So I think that if I had to take one assumption of the meta is that it is very, very diverse, but you do have to pick which one of these top 3 leaders, Shanks, Blackbeard, and Dofi, that you kind of want to have your deck play towards, and then just kind of hope that you don't see the one that you don't want to play against in tournaments, because that's going to be a big determining factor throughout a long day in tournaments of how often you'll see your bad matchups. And you just have to try to take whatever deck you think that you are willing to take the bad matchups. I do think that this is a big 3 format. I think that this is probably one of the best formats that One Piece has had in a long time ago, just from the information covering all these different decks and there being top leaders, whereas before it'd only be 5 or 6. You can see here a lot of these are 5 to 10 different leaders, being able to mix it up in these toppings, which is a good healthy way to be. And I don't think there's anything with having 3 really good decks that are the top 3 decks, because then these other decks that are trying to sneak in, if you take your matchups the right way and you build a certain way to make maybe some of your matchups more favorable and then lose a different one a different way, you can really perform well in a tournament. But that is my coverage over all of these events. Like I said, all this information is provided by eggmanevents.com. Go and check this site out. Give all the support to them for providing all this information. I just wanted to give you guys, anyone that follows me, the coverage of the One Piece, and I will keep making some One Piece content for you guys. But let me know what y'all think about this video. What deck do you think is going to come up in the next meta once we get the next set in the game? I do think that I am predicting, a lot of people, that there will be a lot more Bello Betty players once the new stuff comes out, only because she can really put a quick beating on the Luffys, and it will mix up the meta even more. I do think that we are in a healthy, really good, diverse meta. You just have to pick and choose your matchups into those top 3 decks, and you can do well. But that is it for me today. I appreciate everyone hanging out with me. Leave the video a like, subscribe to the channel. Peace.